We have Chase Count. We have Chase Count from Greenbound, and we also have Megan McMillan, who is the Director of Weatherization Programs and Services at CHP Energy Solutions. As you have heard, this session is being recorded, and we will email the presentation to you. If you have any questions, you can drop your questions in the Q&A box anytime during the session. And with that being said, Chase and Megan, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Keisha. So once again, let me get this going. I'm Chase Counts with Greenbound Consulting, founder and principal, where our objective is to, our mission rather, is to catalyze energy affordability, and doing so primarily through supporting the Weatherization Assistance Program Provider Network. And happy to be doing this with the support of NCAP and with Department of Energy. For those of you, we're 4 sessions. This is now our 4th session into this series, so I'll keep my introduction brief. But I got my start in 2010 with CHP Energy Solutions alongside Megan McMillan. Started as a building science weatherization trainer, and early on in the ARA days, worked on developing some protocols for low-rise multifamily weatherization energy auditing. And that led to developing some utility programs also with Megan, running our weatherization operations also with Megan, and developing a state-funded weatherization deferral repair program prior to the Weatherization Readiness Fund. And I'd also like to introduce Megan with CHP Energy Solutions. Oh.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. I am Megan McMillan. I'm the Director of Weatherization for CHP, Community Housing Partners Energy Solutions. I've been with CHP for 16 years. Started as a ARA baby, I'll say, in 2009. Started as a admin and have worked my way up in different roles and responsibilities through Energy Solutions, and now I'm the director. And so CHP, we're a large weatherization provider. We cover 47 localities in Virginia, so we're the largest provider in Virginia and somewhere, I think, in the top 15 of the nation. And we've been doing multifamily weatherization for as long as I've been at CHP. So we had to stumble through some in the beginning. So it's really exciting that this whole webinar series is happening. So for those that are just getting started or need a refresher, this is really great information. So happy to be here. Thank you, Chase.
Oh, thank you. And before we get going, a couple of housekeeping features. So whether you've been in the trenches for decades or just starting your multifamily weatherization journey, we're going to do a deep dive on starting the process for low-rise multifamily weatherization. And we're going to take what we've been building toward in the last 3 sessions and walk step by step through how a multifamily project actually gets done. And from the very first conversations with the property owner to leaving the site in better shape than we arrived. By the end of the session, we hope you'll feel armed with some practical strategies to either help plan out your multifamily operations approach or take your multifamily programs to the next level. So a couple of points of housekeeping. Please use the Q&A box or function for questions. If it's not something we can answer live, we'll follow up. And we'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A or some live Q&A. And because we know we have so many practitioners here in the audience, I would encourage anyone to feel free to make contributions to our content that we're covering in the chat in real time. We'd love to capture that and incorporate it into future iterations of this content as we progress and develop this further. And just in case EJ Janik is in the audience, apologies for not reaching out to you sooner, but hope to loop you into the session 5. This session is also eligible for BPI CEUs. We will take a short break about halfway through the session, as we have previously. And last quick note, this session is pretty dense. We have a lot of slides, um, with hopefully some good content that will be able to be referred to when we send these out. So we're going to move at a pretty good pace today. And when you receive the slide presentation, you may see a few slides that we had to cut for time, but I think it'll be some good content overall for your reference. Today's run a show. We're going to do a quick session 3 recap. We're going to oh, I'm sorry. We're going to do a quick session 3 recap, and the rest is kind of our overarching agenda for today. We'll see where the break falls in, but we'll try to make it right around the 55-minute mark of the hour. And let's go ahead and get started with our session 3 recap. So last month we took a deep dive into how agencies can scale their operations to support multifamily weatherization. We walked through the different staffing models like in-house crews, subcontractor, hybrid approaches, breaking down the strengths and weaknesses and risks of each approach. We then focused on some training and capacity building, covering not just the technical skills, but also the soft skills, as well as contractor engagement and the critical role of office operations in keeping projects on track. Next, we looked at project identification and selection, which we'll talk about a little bit more today, and exploring what makes an ideal multifamily project, where to find them, how to align project choices with your agency's current capacity. We wrapped up the discussion of funding and resource allocation, highlighting the complexity of multifamily funding streams and strategies for phasing projects and managing fiscal operations. Finally, we zoomed out to consider long-term viability, emphasizing workforce stability, operational resilience, and keeping multifamily weatherization aligned with your agency's mission. Our main takeaway from session 3, scaling multifamily weatherization is not just about taking on more work. It's about creating the right people, systems, and strategies to ensure the work is both effective today and sustainable for the future. So with that foundation in place, we will now focus on beginning the process of multifamily weatherization. So if session 3 was about scaling your internal operations and building the foundation, session 4 is about putting that engine into gear. So our session 4 learning objectives are outlined here, and I apologize in advance. This has been a particularly talkative week, so if my voice sounds like it's giving out, I may have to lean on my co-presenter. Our goal here is to give you a clear roadmap, excuse me, of the process from prospecting properties to fiscal closeout, while also sharing real-world lessons that smooth out the bumps in the road. So again, whether your agency is just dipping its toes into multifamily projects or you've done a few and want to streamline your process, today's session should help you answer, where do I start? Who do I engage and how? And how do I avoid some common pitfalls? So, excuse me, let's begin by going over some key stakeholders involved in the multifamily weatherization projects and also some communication strategies for engaging them. For multifamily weatherization, success really hinges on strong relationships. Core stakeholders include leasing agents, property managers, property owners, asset managers, residents, maintenance staff, and property contractors. Each group has their own unique motivations and pain points. So our objective is to tailor communication so that each stakeholder feels heard and understands the value that weatherization brings. So we're going to go through each one of these stakeholders, and as usual, Megan, I'd encourage you to chime in whenever you feel, whenever you'd like. Oh, hold please. There we go. All right. So leasing agents, they often act as gatekeepers. One of their primary functions is to kind of protect the property manager's time And one of the ways they do that is by gatekeeping solicitations. So ideally, the first communication you want with the property is not with the leasing agent. Property managers, they're constantly putting out fires. If their desk looks buried, they expect challenges getting on their radar. If their desks are clean and organized, I haven't seen one. But instead of forcing weatherization into property managers' crisis-driven day, try to demonstrate how it reduces complaints, lowers maintenance calls, reduces turnover, and makes residents happier. And ask how they prefer to communicate and adapt to their style. Property owners and asset managers, well, property owners in particular, care about reducing turnover, stabilizing rents, and protecting long-term investments. They'll respond to benefits like fewer maintenance calls and capital improvements covered by the Weatherization Assistance Program. Asset managers, they often see the property as a financial instrument, but many are open to improvements that protect their investment. So when framing WAP, tie the conversations to cost savings, reduced turnover, and enhanced asset value. So residents or tenants, and this is a matter of semantics. I tend to use the term resident, but it's interchangeable with tenant. I find the term resident a little less aggressive than tenant, but everybody has their own preferences. Residents are not the decision makers, but their cooperation really makes or breaks a project. Their drivers are often high energy bills, comfort issues, health concerns, minimizing disruptions. But they're not the ones that called for weatherization, in most of the cases for multifamily weatherization. So you may want to address privacy concerns up front, explain why the work is happening in their units. And one pro tip to kind of walk away with is that understand that residents talk to one another. And you may want to have messaging ready for the question, why did my neighbor get insulation, HVAC equipment, or a new water heater, and I didn't? So you want to consider training crews on how to answer that and when to escalate, but also to have an escalation process. Property maintenance staff often know the buildings and residents better than anyone. So I always encourage folks to tap into that knowledge early. Ask how long they've been there. Often high maintenance turnover may signal significant challenges with the property. And on the other end of the spectrum, long tenured staff can bring really invaluable insight. They can tell you which residents are cooperative, where maybe less cooperative residents are, and what areas of the property need more attention. So I encourage folks to treat them as partners and not just as a support function. Property contractors, properties, they often struggle to find reliable contractors. So if that can often be a selling point where you can help introduce them to your contractor network. And if you already have, or if the property already has a steady network of contractors, consider onboarding those contractors into your own operations, but make sure that it doesn't compete for that contractor's time in serving the property. You want to be transparent with the scope of work so you don't create friction with existing vendor relationships as well. So those are the stakeholders. So let's talk about some communication strategies. So with planning, it really starts with three basics. You want to find the true decision maker. You want to prepare strong takeaways. And you want to make sure your outcomes are defined. Consistency in communication is sort of the glue that holds all these relationships together. As we mentioned earlier, leasing agents can block you. So persistence can help if that does wind up being the first point of contact at the property. As my sister Jessie on the call likes to often say, never underestimate the effect of sweet treats and how that can open up doors. You might also consider networking through associations, housing providers, and groups that are already familiar with the benefits of weatherization. And those groups are like enterprise community partners or stewards of affordable housing for the future and the National Housing Trust. Use referrals from your first completed projects to gain traction for the next. I always recommend leaving behind clear, digestible information. Flyers or information packets that are tailored to the specific stakeholder's preference may often work best. This is a process where you might want to feel out who you're talking to, who your audience is, to determine whether they want all of the information up front, or whether you need to like spoon feed it to them in like gradual increment. Sometimes having too much information will scare folks off, or you can stage it out, and as you build the trust with that stakeholder, unless they want everything up front. So takeaways should manage expectations carefully. Services that WAP can provide, the eligibility requirements, staff workload and resident disruptions, also program limitations, so that who you're talking to knows what the overall objective is and the limitations of the program. You also want to be transparent about equipment and contractor selection. Owners in particular may want more input, so you'll want to clarify those boundaries early on. And one thing that we've come across quite a bit, and we'll talk more about it later, is equipment sizing. If you have the opportunity to install new HVAC equipment, for instance, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. You want to aim to build trust that your agency delivers what it promises. Stakeholders should leave the conversation with a clear picture of program benefits, but also the limitations. A property manager who buys in can oftentimes become your strongest advocate, and that can help smooth over resident concerns and keep the project on track. And lastly, for this section, you want to keep your team aligned so that the message is the same no matter who speaks. Assigning a single point of contact for the property staff can limit the opportunities for miscommunication and build credibility and trust over time. That person should stay involved from the intake process through closeout, so the relationship between the property and the agency feels seamless. I ran through that section pretty quick, so Megan, I'd like to open it up, see if you got any feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Chase. I think that, pinpointing on that last bullet of having a singular point of contact is huge. And like I said, CHP, we've been doing multifamily weatherization for years. And that is one key takeaway that when I started really getting into multifamily, that I understood very quickly, is that communication matters and having a singular point of contact for that property makes all the difference. We typically try to do closeout meetings after each project, and that was one of the complaints or needs improvement areas for us early on. Was we had too many people that they had to talk to so through the whole process. So I think that is really, really important. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize is, making sure that you are talking with the right people. Chase, you mentioned in some of your slides of, it's really important that you get to those property owners. We have had situations where a property manager was very engaged, overly so, and was attempting to sign the agreement for services until we requested further clarification. So again, making sure you're getting the right signatures, talking to the right people is really important. But yeah, having kind of like a subject matter expert in multifamily, having that be your key contact through these processes, I think would be extremely helpful. And as we get into getting into the job and doing the job, having that same contact if possible through the entire process is really helpful. But yeah, all of the slides list out very, very good information. Secondly, just very quickly, I do want, or thirdly or fourthly, whichever point I might be on, sorry, is maintenance staff. Do not overlook maintenance staff. They are extremely important through this entire process. Like Chase said, if they have some longevity, they know the property, they know what's going on with it, they know the units that they've had to go to multiple times, they know the residents that might have a collecting situation, they know the property. The other piece of that is post. Those are the folks that are going to be maintaining the work that you're doing. So whether it's, replacing air filters or being familiar with new equipment or ASHRAE fans. And so they are an extremely, extremely important part of this process, which again, learning by error in the beginning, didn't really recognize how important property maintenance staff was to begin with, but they can be your best friends through this entire process. So just kind of wanted to highlight those few points.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Megan. So strong stakeholder engagement really sets the stage for identifying the right properties. So up next, we'll be shifting into prospecting, where to find good candidates, how to size up projects, and how to start with the simplest properties first. So the goal here is to identify properties that are good fits for the weatherization assistance program. You want to use multiple data sources, understand what makes an ideal first project, and then verify that on site. We always encourage start small and manageable, and we'll talk about what that means. And get some early wins to build credibility and some momentum. So some data sources for prospects. We always recommend starting with the HUD DOE and USDA DOE lists and the strong starting points because the properties are already qualified. Depending on state plan, depending on the systems that you might use for communicating projects to your state agency, you may have to still pull rent rolls, acquire the appropriate names and demographic information. Public Housing Authority lists and LIHTC property databases can also be valuable. I also wouldn't overlook local affordable housing providers. And in some cases, you might look back at your client applicants and see if there are clusters of previous weatherization applicants that might indicate a property in need. There are some commercial tools available that typically have some pricey price tags. And also you can't understate the benefit, the value of having referrals once you get your first project up and running.
Another prospect that I think most states have is the LIHEAP fuel assistance list. You can use that for single family as well, but that's where you can look at clusters of addresses that might be, 123 Happy Lane Unit C, or 123 Happy Lane Unit F. That can also be a good resource for looking for properties that very potentially could be eligible.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. So what are some ideal multifamily weatherization project characteristics? And we always recommend start small. Start with buildings that are maybe 2 to 12 units. Fewer than 3 stories for our low-rise multifamily focus. And if possible, consistent layouts and equipment can really simplify things. Always, always, always recommend finding all electric properties, especially for the first few. You also want to make sure it has good site access. We'll talk about more what that means later on. And staff responsiveness. If If they're responsive to communications, or if they're not responsive to communications early on, that could be a bellwether for the rest of the project. Yeah, all of these factors make the first project run smoother, and there's less risk involved. So you also want to avoid complications on pilot projects. We mentioned this already, but gas appliances add complexity. Davis-Bacon rules apply to IJA weatherization projects with 5 units or more. Build America, Buy America adds requirements for public housing authority projects. So you want to keep those things in mind, so you can keep the first pilot project and the subsequent few projects as simple as possible. So you ultimately want to set up wins for your team, build that confidence, build that momentum before tackling more complex projects. So once you've identified a project, now you want to take a look at, actually, we call it prospecting. Other people may use other terminology. Welcome anybody to chime in the chat if they do. But on-site interviews with property managers and maintenance staff are essential. You want to verify eligibility, collect rent rolls if needed, and you also want to be mindful of personally identifiable information, or PII. In order to do that, so PII is basically any 2 or 3 pieces of information that if somebody some bad actor got their hands on, they could start creating fake accounts for residents at the property, for instance. So ways to avoid exposing PII. You want to make sure that rent rolls, if you're working with rent rolls, they're never emailed. You either want to go on site, collect physical copies, or if you're working with electronic versions, they're either redacted or they're transferred using a secure file transfer protocol. And that can be something as simple as just sending a SharePoint link for the property to upload from. And what that ultimately does is it helps prevent, if either your agency or the property management firm is for some reason hacked and somebody has access to those emails, they can't find that personally identifiable information in those email threads and then use them for creating fake accounts. You also want to make sure to confirm who pays the utility bills. Gather unit maps, unit layouts, blueprints if they have them available, schedules. You also want to know the resident notice requirements. Some properties may require up to 72 hours notice before entering a unit. Some are as brief as 24 hours. So you want to know that up front. And having this information really streamlines the audit process and helps with planning on later. You may consider digging deeper with property managers and the maintenance staff. You want to make sure to confirm your fuel types. Even if they report that they're all electric, you want to confirm that once you're on site. Collect equipment lists if available for HVAC, water heating, and appliances. Only a handful of properties ever have that information readily available, but it makes things a lot easier if they do. I also recommend asking about replacement schedules. Like if a unit is turned over, are they installing new, faucet aerators that would not necessarily qualify for weatherization? So you want to know what materials they use during those unit turnovers. And the more you know upfront, the fewer surprises you have during the audit process. Walk units where you can. Ideally vacant units for the early inspections. You want to choose units that are easy to access, but are also representative of the property. May pay attention to resident cooperation. If you identify, maybe that's through conversations with the property manager or maintenance staff, particularly agreeable residents, those make great pilot candidates, especially if there aren't vacant units on site. Also keep in mind that neighbors talk. So create a positive atmosphere for the pilot households. to kind of bring the less agreeable residents on board over time. And empathy goes a long way here. This is where soft skills come up. You also want to understand the site logistics. We've talked about this before, but is there sufficient parking, staging, restroom, maybe smoke areas? Be mindful of unit accessibility and key management. Is there a master key that accesses every unit or every mechanical closet? Are there individual keys for each unit? And how does the property maintain that so that you don't lose track of, you don't find yourself coming across missing keys or mislabeled keys? Are the mechanicals behind locked doors, or are they accessible once you get in there? Yeah, clear logistics planning reduces that resident disruption and contractor downtime. The fewer disruptions you can make in client households, the happier overall residents of the property are going to be. You also want to make sure to ask about communication preferences. Some staff, they're going to prefer a phone call or a text or an email. Maybe they use Teams or some other chat feature. But I encourage you to find out what that is and meet them where they already are. That's going to ultimately improve responsiveness and establish that much more trust with those stakeholders. So clearly, property walkthroughs are critical. Again, you want to target vacant units as they're available. You also want to collect enough unit level data to build a reliable scope of work. And you want to make sure that that follows the criteria outlined in your individual estate plan. Use this information that's collected on site to and extrapolate that across the property and plan out measures by unit type. And that might be by quantity of bedrooms and bathrooms or specific floor layouts. May include certain orientations in some cases. And while you're on site, you don't want to forget to inspect the interstitial or the in-between spaces. That might be, attics, crawl spaces, but also party walls and also in between floors. You want to check the vent terminations and clearances. Is there clearance in the party planes? Basically, the plane above a lower level ceiling and the plane below the upper level floor. Yeah, you also want to identify where there are knee walls and firewalls. They may pose challenges for working in attics or crawl spaces. A row of townhomes may have a firewall between every unit, or they may have a firewall between every 3 or 6 units. And that's going to impact the ability to actually deliver air sealing and attic insulation, for instance. You also want to be mindful of where the access points are, particularly attic and crawl space accesses. If they're behind resident doors, okay, that's going to be another resident disruption. If they're in a central breezeway, that makes things a lot easier and a lot less disruptive in working with the residents. And so you want to note those things for project planning. I also want to assess ASHRAE compliance. We've got some more stories here. Make sure to look at existing vent terminations. Are they sized properly? Assess the current condition of the existing equipment. That may indicate levels of maintenance and whether maintenance may need to be trained on maintaining the new fans. Plan where the new vent runs might go. Is it going through attic? Are they going to require roof jacks? Is it going through the siding? Is there sufficient space in those interstitial spaces in between floors? And also consider whether you're going to need to insulate those runs. Megan, I know you got something to chime in
Oh,
on this.
I've been
Knew that
writing
was
down my
coming.
list. Um, so I'm gonna work my way up and come down. So one of the other helpful hints about prospecting, even before you get on site, of trying to find the ideal property, is Google search properties ahead of time. And that way, if they're on the list, say it's a HUD or USDA on one of those lists, you might Google search it and it be 4 stories or 5 stories high. And it might be, what, our state's using a priority list. This doesn't fall within utilizing that priority list. We're trying to start simple. So we're going to put that one to the side. So Google searching, you can get a layout of how the property looks, figure out how many buildings, how many units per building. You can also a lot of times tell what kind of fuel, like if it has gas, there'll be vent terminations and things like that. So you can get an idea, do they have heat pumps, like the outdoor compressor units? It really can give you a lot of information. And Google the property itself. I do a lot of, there's a, I don't know if it's apartments.com. I can't remember what the website is, but I always Google whatever property and try to find out as much information ahead of time as possible. And a lot of times on those sites or on the site of who owns the property, it'll have like that property has these defined income limits, which is really helpful. So you can know, okay, is this even one worth going into? So again, use Google as your friend, when you're starting this journey. The second thing I wanted to mention is about the residents at the property and making sure that you have really good rapport with them. And just a quick anecdote. We were recently working at a property in Central Virginia, and there was a unofficial mayor of that particular property. Once our field superintendent won over the mayor, everything went beautifully. So it really is important that you are going into folks' homes and they did not ask you to be there. This is not like typical single family weatherization. So you really, really have to be mindful of that when you're going into multifamily. Again, we've talked previously about making sure there's as minimal door knocks as possible, and making sure you are not only communicating with property staff and maintenance, but yet you're communicating with the residents of that project. So again, I just kind of wanted to emphasize that importance. And then the makes my throat hurt. ASHRAE. Yes, do I have some more stories? And I think I've talked about them previously on a different session, but I cannot emphasize the importance of making sure you have a good ASHRAE strategy, even if you have to schedule a day where you go into a unit and you figure out exactly what you're going to be doing for ASHRAE, because it can get super complicated, especially if you're dealing with 3 stories. And do you have a vent termination out, a brick exterior? Again, we'll kind of get into resource management, but something you don't think about is if you do have to drill into brick, you have to have the right drill bit in order to get through brick. Again, different things that you have to think about, but ASHRAE it is difficult. It is not like single family. It's not. I will tell you now. It's not like single family. You really have to have a good strategy to meet ASHRAE and explore using alternatives. I'll give another quick example. Sorry. Is recently CHP, we are now starting to use ERVs in almost every multifamily that we're doing. We have found, typically we use exhaust only, but we have found with the, most multifamily units are fairly small, and the exhaust only method doesn't seem to work the most appropriately. So we are now, where we can, and in every scenario, trying to utilize ERVs. It's just a much more balanced method to meet the ASHRAE requirement. So again, really important. Talk to your technical people about what your ASHRAE strategy is going to be, and you know, take it very, very seriously. Like I said, we've definitely had some not good times, and some really, I mean, just bad mess ups. I mean, that's just the best way I know how to say it, when dealing with ASHRAE. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize those few things. Again, all of the other slides are definitely things you have to take into consideration and think about, through this process. But yeah, I just wanted to emphasize those 2 or 3 things.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. And I think it was on the slide when we introduced ourselves, but just to preface for the audience, we're both in Virginia. So our experience is primarily in the Southeast, so mixed hot, humid climate. And so you want to make sure that your ASHRAE strategy is tailored to your specific climate region. Okay. Okay, so
One
once
more
you've
thing,
been,
Chase, I'm
oh yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt before we move on. The other thing I want to say about ASHRAE, and this kind of gets in particulars, is that if you are thinking of alternative ASHRAE strategies, make sure you get with your state and that you have whatever you are planning on using, get the waiver from DOE to have it on the Appendix A. A very important piece of that a lot of people forget. Not naming names, but did forget that part of the process. But just again, making sure that the materials that you're going to be using, if they're outside of your norm, that you make sure to talk with your state and with DOE to get that waiver. So sorry,
Yeah.
just
No, great
last
point.
piece.
Appreciate you throwing that in there. All right, so once you've identified good properties, another step in the process is resource planning. So uh, core categories are going to include financial, human, time, and client resources. You want to make sure you're not overlooking support assets like facilities, vehicles, tools, and materials. And having a strategic view of your resources ensures that when you find the right property, you can actually deliver. So I tend to define resource management as aligning what you have with what the project needs. It's a bit of a supply and demand issue, weatherization economics. Uh, Key categories, again, are there's financial, human, time, and client resources. And as well as the other assets that I've already covered before. Um, the main thing here is not getting so in the weeds that you can't see the full vision of what your resources and assets are. And that's one of the toughest things to do as a weatherization program director. And not having that full picture in mind might lead to overcommitting or underutilizing those resources. So again, I think of it as like balancing supply and demand, supply being your ability to serve clients, and demand being the number of applicants or properties that are actually in your pipeline. To the extent possible, you want to use data to drive that decision-making process and not just gut instincts, which also plays a role. The goal here is ultimately to keep those resources aligned so that you can meet the production targets without necessarily burning out staff or running out of funds. Okay. And so there's going to be a few extra slides in this slide deck when you all get it. They may cover some other information, more detailed in those core categories of resources. But we're going to move into strategic resource planning and focusing on the supply side. You may want to evaluate outcomes from your financial, human, and time resources. Use some job cost data to check whether you are staying within your ACPU limits. Track leveraged funds and low-cost jobs that help stretch dollars further. And that's one of the primary benefits of multifamily weatherization. It's an incredible tool for helping to maintain your ACPU when done correctly. You want to use those results to determine whether more crews or subcontractors are needed on the human resources side. And where possible, these projects can be time consuming, but if you can plan out cluster, well, on the single family side, if you can cluster jobs, that's great for some economies of scale, but multifamily jobs are already clustered. On the demand side, so you will want to manage your wait lists. And one way you can do that is periodic check-ins with folks that have been on the list for a while. If the more you can proactively keep those clients updated, the more likely or the less likely they are to lose interest and contribute to your client attrition rates. Where possible, use leveraged funds and identify low-cost projects like multifamily to expand your reach and maybe take on some of those higher cost jobs. And never underestimate the power of storytelling. And that's something that I think weatherization has an amazing story and too few storytellers. It's a compelling story that a lot of organizations and other industries want to be a part of. I want to be a part of helping low to moderate income households save on energy and live in healthier homes.
Hey, Chase, something I want to add here, and I think it kind of goes into this. Maybe it might be appropriate at a different spot as well. But one of the things that you have to take into consideration when you are thinking about resource planning is what processes do you, the agency, need to go through along with your state? Because you may have a good process for multifamily and a good expectations of timelines, but you also have to make sure that you're working closely with your state, because if there's an approval process, what that approval process entails. And it kind of goes into the effect of, checking in with your clients. So if you have a multifamily property owner that you aligned expectations with, you want to make sure those expectations are in alignment with your state as well. So again, some states have, they're out there doing multifamily one after the other and have really good processes. And then some states are just kind of getting into it now, or were into it during ARA and getting back into it. So making sure that you have a really good relationship with your state and understanding what their timelines are and what their process is for reviewing for approvals and things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Megan. So kind of continuing on the demand side of the equation for strategic resource planning, building out that pipeline of candidates, and this applies to both single family and multifamily job projects. The outreach can be a really valuable resource or tactic rather. Look at resource and job fairs for clients and new staff respectively. And mapping tools to target underserved areas, whether you're tracking that internally or there are some beneficial tools that are publicly available like LEAD and Celica. Partnerships with stakeholders. Having that strong stakeholder network can really be a benefit. Consider some media campaigns. We saw some success with local media news stories, like on the 5 o'clock news. Having consistent messaging on marketing collateral, staying in touch with past clients. Again, the word of mouth, the referrals, they tend to be the most effective and least resource intensive way of driving the demand side of your equation. And you consider mixing and matching these tools to sustain your pipeline. So you also want to consider how to mitigate risks, and some of the risks that you'll anticipate are listed here. As much as possible, try to anticipate those risks before they derail a project. Whether it's weather delays, environmental hazards, client issues, equipment failures, um, all of these things may need some backup plans, and this is not something to uh, prevent you from pursuing your first multifamily job. It's going to be something that you learn along the way. But the more you can document that and plan around it, the smoother the future projects are going to be. Building an emergency and first aid protocol into your plan. You likely already have one. Just explore ways to adapt that for multifamily. And have a process for deferrals and outlier projects so staff know how to communicate or respond consistently to those residents and property managers. You're on some of your other assets that you'll want to keep in mind, like your equipment, whether it's blower doors, combustion analyzers. Hopefully no combustion on the first few projects, but main thing is to make sure everything's calibrated and maintained up to date, and maintain a reliable inventory, and plan ahead for procurement so shortages don't hold up production, especially when you have specific materials that are called for in the scope of work that might hold up a project. In some case, like refrigerators, if your program allows, if SIRs allow, or if you're bringing leveraged funds to the tables that require or allow for refrigerator replacements, they're built big, bulky appliances, and you may want to consider planning around those deliveries. All right, and again, on the resource planning, some other energy auditing requirements to keep in mind. This is more of a framing proposition in my mind. Energy audits are not a one-time event. It's a process. You want to make sure that you're planning through the pre-audit stage where you're reviewing files and bills, maybe identifying some trends in those documents. Communicate with clients and property owners or managers during the process to set those expectations. And on the post-audit side, where you may need to finalize the scope, coordinate installation timelines, manage expectations, and develop a clear action plan. And you also want to factor in scheduling and job requirements, which the next few slides will cover before we go into job forecasting. Crew availability will ultimately drive your production. And I won't spend much time on this because everybody's doing it on the single family side already, but track trained staff, know your turnover rates, track credentials. Maybe you need to consider balancing, a 2-person crew versus 3-person crew structure, depending on the workload. And there are tools available like a SWOT analysis, like we covered on this session 3, that can be helpful there. You can consider rotating crews to prevent burnout, and invest in training time when there are slower periods of production. Factor in personal dynamics, your size of your operation, cultural considerations, and community values for both your clients, your crews, and your contractors should all be factored in. And then lastly, crew and resident safety, as well as resident comfort too, you should be built into all of your scheduling. Scheduling has some external factors, as I like to call them. That's holidays, weather, cultural events, things you have less influence over. Internal job factors, that influence scheduling include job location, travel distance, and client resident notification. Make sure to provide advance notice to both staff and clients, understanding again those notice requirements for each property as they may vary property to property, and watch for scheduling pitfalls. That could be staff callouts, client or property manager no-shows, even material shortages. Ultimately, proactive planning reduces costly delays. And what time are we at? Let's
I
let's
think
run through
maybe
these.
we should go ahead.
Yeah, let's run through these last few slides, and we'll take a break right after. This last section shouldn't take too long. So job forecasting needs forecasting ensures adequate resources are available. It's the outcome of your resource planning. Anticipate demand with seasonal data and historical production data. Plan ahead to avoid project delays and wasted staff hours. You might want to use tools like spreadsheets, as we all have spreadsheets to track our spreadsheets, I'm sure, and index to analyze the past performance of production. If you, one way to index is to divide the total allocation you have, factoring in, excuse me, factoring in all leverage resources, divided by the total households served annually, and that can help you set realistic goals. So that's going to differ from your ACPU. And consider policy changes that may impact future demand. Obviously, materials and equipment planning are essential. Make sure to align orders with project scopes, track lead times, factor in weather, holiday delays. Keep inventory up to date, record and set reorder triggers where possible to prevent shortages. Safety is always a resource consideration. Common risks you're going to find on the multifamily job sites, like most single family job sites, confined spaces, potential for hazardous materials, always trip and fall hazards. Also factor in seasonal risks like extreme heat, wildfires, as you come across them, or icy conditions. Oh, 1 second. Okay. Demand side tactics include mapping underserved areas, forming partnerships with utilities, and engaging other advocacy groups that are aligned, housing, consumer advocates, environmental and energy advocates as well. Build relationships with local governments, your housing associations, and bill assistance providers. Oh, and lastly, before we take a break, effective allocation and scheduling really opens up the opportunities for new funding. It can improve staff retention and reduce overall risk to your organization. When resources are managed well, you can recapture and you can leverage or utilize recapture and reallocated funds that might go otherwise unused. Strong planning supports that staff retention by showing reinvestment in the workforce, and it positions your agency to pursue competitive grants potentially or private funds with more confidence than you otherwise would have. Risk mitigation can be a major benefit as well, avoiding negative outcomes like investigations or funding delays. You're protecting your agency's reputation as well as your operations. And for smaller agencies, delayed reimbursements can be especially tough. Carrying expenses into the next billing cycle can strain budgets, and careful planning can prevent all of this. Ultimately, effective resource planning builds trust with stakeholders, ensures timely reimbursement, and stabilizes your programs. And we're right at the top of the hour, and we're approaching our next section. So why don't we take our break now and come back at 3:10. All right. Thanks, everyone.